Welcome back to Manhattan Beach Studios, and I am Mark, and today is another episode of The Studio Life. And that's about life in the studio, and it's also about life in the entertainment business. And today we're talking about Hollywood, and can Hollywood be saved? Because there's a lot of talk right now about whether or not Hollywood can be saved, and whether or not we need to disincentivize other countries from participating or from producing content, or, tariffs or money and stuff like that. So let's talk about Hollywood, the state of Hollywood, where we are right now, and whether it can be saved. And the question about whether Hollywood can be saved is a very fascinating one, because we really have to start with one question. Is there a crisis? What's the crisis that we're trying to solve? Is there magically a lack of content? Are we trying to create more content? Are we trying to make sure that only the United States gets to create the content? What's our crisis that we're dealing with? Because I'll tell you something, as we think about Hollywood, we have to ask ourselves whether or not Hollywood is amongst the most powerful entities in all of the world. And the answer, I think, is yes, absolutely. If you go back generations ago, there was a guy named Walter Yetnikoff, and Walter Yetnikoff was the president of CBS, and he was widely known as the most powerful man in the world, and the most powerful person in the world. And the question is really, how can the president of a network be the most powerful person in all of the universe? And that's because that person helps to dictate what we watch, what we like, what we buy, what influences us. And as CBS expanded into broader categories, the influence became even broader. So the power of entertainment is amongst the greatest things that has ever been invented. So Hollywood, if you define Hollywood as the movie industry, is technically the most powerful thing that has ever existed. It is still defining everything we do in every way that we do it. It's what we watch when we go home, when we're tired, when we're looking for a romantic evening. It's what we do when we go out. So can Hollywood be saved? Well, yeah. But let's ask ourselves also, what is Hollywood? Hollywood is a tiny little town in Los Angeles. And I happen to be in Los Angeles, and I happen to love Hollywood. But Hollywood is not the entertainment business. And for that matter, Hollywood technically never even has been. If you go back to the Johnny Carson days and things like that, that was happening in Burbank, and other things were happening in New York, and other things were happening all over the place in Chicago. You're talking some of the biggest production companies in the world out of Chicago. Is Hollywood a concept that defines movie making? And is it limited to the four corners of the little tiny area called Hollywood? When we start thinking about foreign produced, are we asking ourselves things that are outside of Hollywood, or are we asking ourselves outside of the country? What are we really trying to do when it comes to, can Hollywood be saved? And I think as we start to think about Hollywood, I think we have to ask ourselves, what really is our goal? Is our goal that the content is produced inside of America, inside of the United States, or is our goal that stuff is being produced in that particular town? Let's really make sure that we understand what we're trying to save. Because if you look at the statistics, we're making more money, more movies every year than we've made year over year in the past 5 years. And that's post-COVID. And pre-COVID, the numbers were skyrocketing as well in terms of the number of overall movies produced. And then you also have to ask yourselves, well, out of the movies that are produced, how many movies are actually being released? And that number, again, up and up and up. And so we seem to be doing okay. The movie industry, if that is Hollywood, is doing pretty good. There have been a lot of changes, though. And when we think about changes in this economy, in this world, with this technology, some of those changes seem to be pretty natural. For instance, malls are largely going out of business or in financial trouble, unless they've changed the way they do business. Same thing with copywriters in the world of AI. Same thing with all kinds of people in today's environment. Things are changing. You can look back at the early 1900s and the Industrial Revolution, and you have to embrace the fact that things were changing then, and manufacturing jobs and other occupations were suddenly born where there weren't that many in the first place because the economy changed, the technologies changed. And right now, the movie industry is changing. And there are a couple of things that are causing this massive shift as we think about what we're really complaining about. So what are we complaining about, right? We're complaining about the fact that the stages are empty. We covered this in the last episode. But yeah, stages are empty. On our movie lot, we've got this fantastic movie lot over here, and it's pretty quiet right now. And like I said in the last podcast, and please go back, tune in. I think we had some good discussions there. Stages have to change. They have to evolve because they're not being used as often in the traditional sense. What else are we upset about? Well, we know that we know the crew is unemployed. We have a lot of people who are in this business who are not working in this business as often, or certainly for as much money. And we know that there are disincentives. For instance, there are some towns in the United States that really welcome movies, and there are other towns in the United States, including, for that matter, Hollywood, that have not. They have been more restrictive. They have had higher permitting and longer wait times and more red tape. And they were allowed to do that because there were so many movies being produced and there was so much demand that here's where the crews were, that they could get away with that. And obviously we have a slight shift. There's also become an adversarial relationship between some of these groups. Like if you were to talk to actors and writers and talent and crew and producers, you would notice that they've fought a lot lately with one another. There have been a couple of big strikes that have caused havoc in this industry. So there's not a unified approach to how we're doing things. And part of that is because there's not a unified approach to the way the industry is being conducted. AI can replace a writer in many different ways, certainly replace a lot of the writer's time or effort. The marketing of films is completely different. But what else are we seeing? We're seeing some other things too. One of the big things I think we're seeing is that the theaters can be empty. And it's an amazing entertainment facility built around bringing people out and having incredible evenings, watching the best movies that have ever been produced, are sitting with a lot of empty seats. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so maybe there's not enough variety, and maybe people are picking and choosing, but no, they're not. The reason why I know they're not is because you can go and you can look at the number of theaters out there that are really big and have invested a lot of money in their technology and their time. And they're all playing the same movies. If I want to go and see the current Marvel movie, I get to pick that movie from any one of the theaters that are around me. They all have it. There's no variety. And so it's so we have to look at the industry and the shift, and then we have to look at what the movie industry is doing as a result. So we can continue on the shift for a second. We could talk about virtual stages. We could talk about the movement, the geographical movement of the productions. And part of that is why the world got involved. But so did other cities in this country get involved. Hollywood used to house some of the best talent. It also had the best equipment. We had the warehouses. So if you needed a light or you needed a camera or you needed anything special, the facilities were located right here in town. But a lot has changed. A lot of that equipment and that expertise has moved. For instance, you can go now to Atlanta and you can go to Chicago and you can go to Louisiana, the strip down there where so many incredible movies have been filmed. You can go to the Midwest or up to the Pacific Northwest or into Maine, and amazing crews are sitting there waiting. They don't have to be relocated like they used to. There is great expertise all over. And so why not just go to where that expertise sits, including whether it's overseas? For instance, if let's say you were a massive movie, such as maybe something like Avatar, you might find there are a lot of opportunities to film down in New Zealand where you can get sets that you wanted. And while you do have to relocate a lot of people, you don't have to relocate everybody. And it just makes it worthwhile to go sometimes where the filming should be done. So we're seeing shifts. But we also have to recognize the other big shift, which is streaming. It used to be that if you released a movie, the only way to release that movie was by putting it into a theater. And so the theaters held all the cards. But now there are only a few movies being released into the theaters, and everything else is kind of being pushed into streaming. Again, I looked at all the top movie theaters in my area. They're all playing the same movies. So if the top 16 movies are being played, movie number 17 might be stuck in limbo. There's no place for it. The movie theaters are filled up. When movies were hot, we always knew that there was a lead time, or a run time somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 days. That movie could continue to fill the seats for 30 to 40 days before it would be cycled on. And when it was cycled on, it went into a form of limbo where you were trying to create brand new demand from scratch before a DVD was released. So there was excitement, enthusiasm. Not anymore. Clearly not anymore. There's no need for that lead time because a lot of those same people do not go to the theater. And so maybe we have to ask ourselves, can theaters be saved? And maybe we have to ask ourselves, well, if you're going to charge $150 to $200 for a family to go out and see the movies and have the popcorn and things like that, in a world where the economy is tight or budgets are tight, and there's another alternative today to go and turn that movie on for $3.99 or $9.99 or $19.99, and you could bring it into the house, and you no longer have to buy the movie tickets or the super expensive popcorn, and the whole family could sit and gather around. For the first time in our entertainment history, there is legit competition to the theater. And then we have some fights. There were some big fights, especially around COVID, for streaming-only releases. And some of the theaters got mighty pissed. I don't know if you remember this, but mighty pissed because the monopoly of theaters, not the monopoly of a particular theater, but the monopoly of theaters had gone away. Now, is anyone trying to stop that part of the process? Is there some law on the books that says you can't release a streamed movie right away? No, of course not. If that law was in place, maybe the theaters would be more full, but they're not. There's no law in place of that, and so producers are pretty happy to try to grab the funds while the movies are hot. So we have a lot of things are changing. If you're movie number 17 and only the top 16 are in theaters, even though you might make less per stream, you'll make something if you're out there on Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Max, etc., etc., etc. So much going on. But I think that we can look at those general shifts, but if we don't look at one of these other big, massive shifts, then we're really missing the boat, and that is the influence of Netflix. And the question is, should Netflix be broken up like a monopoly? They're destroying the industry. And it's hard to say they're not largely, in some ways, destroying the industry. In part, you also have to ask with whether or not this is an industry ready to be remodeled and rebuilt, whether that destruction is important. There have been some things that have happened over the last 100 years that have become a traditional way that the movie business operates. And a lot of that functioned around sound stages. It was premised on the idea that if you needed something to produce, you would go to the place that was built to produce it. And those sound stages, they were custom built, massive installations, so that you could go into that room and have a lot of what you needed in order to get your movie done. They were perfect for building sets. The lighting providers were located on the lot. Equipment providers, grip and electric, gear providers, they were located on or nearby the lot. Almost everything you needed, the entire infrastructure was located right there. And there was not a need to produce an infinite amount of content. So if a movie studio was essentially going to produce 16 movies that year, it didn't need necessarily to rent every stage out for 365 days. It would figure out its run times and then figure out its budgets based on what it needed to fill, and then it could operate. It was always moving kind of in the production sense. Unlike McDonald's, if you saw the movie The Founders, the production companies were not in the real estate business. They were in the production business. But the production business is expensive, or the real estate business, real estate is expensive. It was expensive to rent those stages. And you needed open spaces. You needed to know that those spaces were available when you needed them. And some of these production studios were getting into the business of an infinite amount of capability, of quantity. Netflix has no limitation built in on how much it can produce. All its limitation is when it releases those. And so Netflix was in the business really of trying to figure out how it was going to produce the content it needed. But here's the other shift. The other shift is they're just going to do it themselves. Netflix got into the business of doing a lot of different things. It wanted to dictate the technology. It wanted to tell you what kind of cameras you could and couldn't use. That meant that the industry, if it wanted to become Netflix approved, needed to start making Netflix approved cameras. Now Netflix was involved in the decision-making process. Number two, licensing. Licensing is a very complicated deal. We've seen it in photography where a lot of the organizations that used to rely on photographers to produce content have decided that hiring and licensing work is simply too expensive. So let's kill all the licensing and just own it. So now they hired the photographers as work for hire. If they're going to take a photo, they're going to buy the photo. They're going to have the copyright transferred. It essentially took out everybody else. Everybody who was not working for that organization is now cut out. And if you're working for that organization, your revenue streams were no longer what they used to be. Well, Netflix is onto this game, right? Why not just build your own facility? Now you control your own lights, you control your own stage, you control your own crew, and you control your own equipment. And because their stages are occupied 24/7, 365, it's a great model for them. They decide what needs to be available. They decide the priority. They decide the set builds. So when they turn around and they say, we're going to build $1 billion facility out on the East Coast in Jersey, they know they're recovering that money. They're filling up the stages. And all the money that used to go to these other stages is out, right? Because they now control them. So that is a big, big shift. There was a promise at one point that the internet would bring infinite opportunities. And it does. If I want to produce a movie and release a movie on YouTube right now, I could do it. I could record this movie right this second and release it on YouTube, just like I'm doing this podcast. But a couple things. Number one, there's too much content out there on YouTube to easily sort. One of the things that Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and Max and with HBO and everybody does is they decide what you're going to watch. They figure out the top 10. They push the top number 1, number 2. They work with journalists to decide what the best Netflix movie that needs to be promoted is, and then they push it. Everyone's going to the same interface. They're giving us all of the movies that we choose from. So unless you go into the search engine and start digging deep, you're going to pick one of their movies that they want you to watch. They're driving the entertainment. They're the Walter Yetnikov of the new era. They decide what you're going to watch. They control, as they say, not only the heartstrings, but the purse strings. And so we've seen this sort of a bundling effect. If you want to be a movie maker, you can. And you have the ability to make that movie and sell to nobody. But if you want to sell that movie, moving it into a Netflix or a distribution pipeline is so important. And they get to control the exact way in which that occurs. If they do it, if they don't do it, and on what terms they choose to do it. They have more power now than the record labels had back in the 70s and 80s when it comes to working with artists. Because you don't have an infinite number of record labels. The record labels that succeed are the ones that are tied to what they pick for the Super Bowl, for what they pick for the television shows that they themselves are producing. So what we've seen is not an infinite number of avenues. We've seen a narrowing down of choices, of the streets that the filmmakers get to choose. So if you want to be a filmmaker, the opportunities have narrowed because these companies, they own the rights and they hire their own content providers and they're hiring the same teams over and over again, or they're employing them outright. This is a massive shift. So can Hollywood be saved? Well, Hollywood continues to be incredibly powerful if you define Hollywood as making movies. But if you define Hollywood as keeping everybody employed on the same terms that it always used to be, then no, Hollywood is completely screwed. Completely screwed. I think you have to ask if that's a bad thing. And if you want it to be fixed, you have to go after Netflix and you have to say, Netflix, you're the enemy. The ability to produce a movie and own the same stage in which you produce that movie needs to be separated. Congress needs to get involved and say a movie producer is not allowed to own their own stage. And you think, well, is that some revolutionary concept? Well, no, it's not a revolutionary concept. It was done throughout generations. If you look at Glass-Steagall, when it came to separating banks from investments and things like that, the idea of saying you're too powerful or you can be too corrupt or too much of a monopoly is not something new. But is Netflix a monopoly? Well, they are competing against a bunch of other providers. Warner Brothers is still out there, Paramount and Sony and HBO and to that point, ABC. And, it's hard to say something is a monopoly when they are not by themselves. But the fact that it does exclude the smaller players, that is kind of where we are. So sure, you can get involved there. You can break up Netflix. I think it's sort of an absurd concept, but I can tell you that as long as Netflix is building its own stages and Amazon is building its own stages, that other stages are going vacant. And they can build that stage wherever they want. And that means not in Hollywood. They can produce the same number of movies or more movies, and it just won't be here. And it won't be in any normal soundstage area. I hope that kind of summarizes, I think, where the industry is and where the crisis is. It's not at all about where the foreign dollars or the foreign films are coming from. If anything, it's the fact that these productions are moving in-house. So it's a different problem. What problem are we trying to solve and what solutions are we trying to employ? I think that summarizes, the state of the movie industry. So is it healthy? Phenomenally healthy, just not for everybody. And if you're going to live in the old days and you're going to just say, woe is me, times have changed, then yeah, you're going to be very sad and frustrated. Times have absolutely changed. I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I can tell you my stage stays active. We're not a movie stage. We're a bit smaller. We support. We do a lot of different things from scenes and things like that. We also produce our own shows. And for that matter, if you want to produce a show, come to us. We would love to support you. But I'm saddened. I'm saddened when I see the empty parking spaces and the closed doors and the enthusiasm, the incredible enthusiasm. The creative space that used to be here is not here right now. Can it come back? Absolutely. Malls are coming back. We've seen malls find ways of reinvigorating themselves. But it doesn't happen naturally. It happens because there's a good business plan in place and they're evolving. Good business plan, evolving. If you're overseas and you have to pay extra money to have a film screened, I don't even know what to say about that. I don't even know what the tariff is or what a foreign produced film is when the producers are sitting here in the US. I don't know what a non-Hollywood produced film is if the producer happens to be sitting in Dallas. I just don't know. Time will tell. But we're trying to fix the wrong problem. The problem really that should be fixed is how do we keep creatives employed? How do we keep avenues available? And how do we keep finding new ways of telling important stories that are not curated only by the biggest organizations anywhere in the world? So that's my 2 cents. I hope it's helpful. And now a little product review, I guess. And so now let's talk about some of the stuff that makes a big difference when it comes to our lives. When we talk about some of the products that we use, this is geared more to the techies out there. So you geeks that want to see different things in action, this is where we talk about that. And it's a lot of fun for us to talk about stupid stuff because stupid stuff saves time. And I know this product's been on the market for a little while, but one of the things that we suffer from is when we're trying to move different camera positions around. And sometimes we have to go from SDI to HDMI or from HDMI to SDI. And we've invested so much money in Blackmagic converters in decimators and in other forms of technology in order to move video signals around. And you know what? For some reason, I just decided that troubleshooting just seemed to become too complicated, too time consuming. So if you're taking an SDI cable, converting it into HDMI, and something went wrong, you didn't know which cable was bad, or was the converter bad? You didn't know anything. You couldn't figure it out. Or why weren't you getting sound? So anyway, we finally decided to invest in this little thing, a Lumentek, Lumentek. And this one is this little tiny device, and it looks exactly like a Blackmagic device or a decimator converter, or the AJA converters, the bidirectionals, although this is not bidirectional. And we figured, well, let's see what we can get with two other features. Number one, with a screen on the front, and number two, with a lot of different frame rates and resolutions to choose from. Up to 1080 on this one, 1080 60, so 3G SDI. The first day we took this thing out, we plugged an SDI cable into it, and we took an HDMI cable out of it, and I picked the resolution with these little dip switches in the back, and everything worked perfectly. It was amazing. And then all of a sudden, our HDMI screens went down. And normally when an HDMI screen goes down, the first thing we think about is, well, that damn HDMI cable, because it's always the HDMI cable. And so as we went to grab a new HDMI cable, the first thing I saw was that this screen had gone dark or was flickering a little bit. I said, wait a second, this one's not the HDMI cable. It's the SDI cable. Or the converter, of course. It could be the converter. But we swapped the SDI cable, and immediately everything was fixed. And the point is that we're talking about speed on a stage. We're talking about how quickly you can troubleshoot a problem. And that problem could have normally taken 5 minutes or longer if you were running around, you don't have an extra cable or something like that. Same thing with sound. As soon as we plugged that HDMI cable in, we actually saw production sound going to this unit. That is so cool, because sending sound over HDMI can be, again, a bit hit or miss. If you're sending it in one way, you have to choose that sound device to send. If you're doing it another way, again, you're running a daisy chain of connections all the way out, and you don't always know where the sound is bad. Well, if you look at this unit and you see the sound is there, then you know everything up to this point is perfect, is exactly the way you want. Or maybe you don't want the sound to be there, in which case you have a problem. So the point is, this little tiny device is already saving us time, which means it's already saving us money. And we're going to pick up more of them. And so I know, hey, listen, Lumentek, you've got nothing to do with us other than this one little device on our stage. I can't believe I paid $199 to pick this sucker up. It seemed like a lot of money compared to some of the other choices out there. But in seconds, you saved us time. That's amazing. So we wanted to highlight how geeky we are to think that a tiny little stupid converter is going to make our day for this particular episode of the Studio Life. But it did. It made my day, and we share it with you for what it's worth. We are not sponsored by them, but we are happy to have them on our stage. And so with that in mind, we want to thank you very, very much for tuning into this episode of the Studio Life. Our topics are what you want to hear, and let's rant about them. If you want to come on, you want to chat, you want to argue, you want to educate, drop us a note. And of course, if you like talking studio, there are not enough of us out there talking studio, then subscribe, because we can't do it without people on the other end watching. And this is a new venture for us as we get into the live space. It's the beginning of something hopefully great. And in order for us to keep it great, it means we have to keep people's eyeballs. And so subscribe. We'd love to talk to you. In any event, that wraps it up for today, for this amazingly beautiful week in Los Angeles. Thank you very much for watching the Studio Life, and we'll talk to you next time.